Is your brand missing out on one of the most powerful tools in digital marketing? Podcasting isn't just a trend, it's a direct line to trust, community, and influence. I'm Eric Ritter, and on today's episode of The Search Bar, we're dialing into the world of podcast marketing and uncovering how your voice could be your brand's biggest asset. Joining us is Chaz Volk, a disciplined entrepreneur, podcast producer, and the founder of Mr. Thrive Media. Chaz, thanks to the podcast. Super excited to have you here today.
It's great to be here, and I just want to thank you again for having me on your platform to talk podcasting on a podcast.
Right. It's very meta of us to do this, right?
But
it seemed like this started as a side hustle for you way back in 2019, and now it's a full-scale production house helping people use podcasts to amplify their message. And would love to kind of just hand it over to you. And if you could just tell us a little bit about your story and kind of, how you got into podcasting.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. So first of all, I just want to start off by saying thank you for having me on your platform. Really excited to be here on the search bar. And, hopefully that puts us both more on the search bar of Google and all the other platforms. So as for my story and how we created Mr. Thrive Media, which is now called The Authority Hive. Back in the day, I used to work in the film industry. And I loved doing audio work in the film industry. I was the boom operator. I had the boom pole above my head back in the day. And I got to work with some really amazing grade A talent like Gordon Ramsay and Terry Crews and Howie Mandel. And as wonderful as it was to be there and as wonderful as it was to be around all these stars and to mic them up and to get all this great on-site experience, it was very inconsistent work. And that's the nature of the film industry as a freelancer. It's start and stop. It's hurry up and wait. It's a lot of kind of just let dust collect in your hair until it's time to get to work. And that's what it felt like a lot of the time. So on my off time, I'd take my audio gear and I started having conversations. And sooner rather than later, I realized I was creating podcasts. And what happened was around that time is I decided, you know what, I'm going to produce this podcast. At the time, it was called the Mr. Thrive Podcast, which is where I got the name for my company later on down the line. But nice. I wanted to like figure out like, okay, like, maybe there's a way to make a business out of this. My dad, he's a major influence in my life. He's a small business owner himself. Ran a company called Mercury Ducting Imaging that I worked at here and there growing up. And my dad, he said to me, I don't know if you know this or not, but I bet you could sell podcasting services and really make a business out of this. And I said,
smart man. Sounds like a smart man.
Right. My dad is a really smart man, one of the smartest men I know. And when he first said that idea, I thought to myself, there's no way businesses would ever need a podcast. Like it's not a practical thing. Yeah. And then as the idea simmered, I realized, oh, wait, he's right. So I started producing a podcast and I started producing his podcast as my very first podcast that wasn't mine. And then next thing I knew, I had a new client just in time for the pandemic. So the pandemic was really the beginning of the business. It started as a side hustle. At the time I was working for a company called the PJ Library, and they had laid me off, as so many Americans were at the beginning of the pandemic. So at that point, I had this kind of burn your ships kind of moment where I realized, okay, you know what, let's just go full force into this. Like, I don't want to have a job ever again because they're just going to lay you off. I know that a lot of people think they're safe because they have a job, but believe it or not, you're way more safer putting everything into your own hands. Is it more stressful? Sure. But now I have the opportunity to go full force into being a business owner and to actually becoming independent. And that's what I did. The pandemic was my sandbox for really exploring the building of that business. Then we were able to create Mr. Thrive Media into a full-on functioning production house and marketing company.
I love that. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I can only, I love that visual of burning the ships, right? You're like, there's no way back. This is it. I'm crossing the river. I'm crossing the lake, whatever it is, the sea. And I'm going full force. And then here you are, right? Later, and you turned it into, from your dad's sage advice, right? Like packaging it and selling it for people. So for those out there that have maybe never dipped their toes into podcasting, Chaz, how would you explain what podcast marketing actually is? Sure
thing. So a great question too, because a lot of people just think to themselves, oh, I'm going to get sponsored. And that's why I'm going to create a podcast. Listen, you certainly can get sponsored, and you should always strive to create metrics on your podcast that enable sponsorship. But that's actually not the goal. And if you look at podcasting as a means to create a new venture in that respect, I think it's a very flawed approach to working towards, especially because you have to consider there are 7 million podcasts in existence. That's the last recorded number.
Wow. That's a big number.
About 5,000 to 7,000 episodes get released daily. So if you can only imagine, it's a very saturated market. There's no single person who's listened to every single podcast episode in the world. It's the fastest growing medium out there. And if you want to compare that to one of the most influential mediums, we're talking about cinema and movies, right? In the first 20 years of cinema existing, only 20 movies have been made, and only 3 of them are full feature films. So when you compare that to the world of podcasting, which has been around for a little over 20 years now, probably around 25 years, as a matter of fact, it truly has exploded in the best way possible. So then your question might be then, well, how could I possibly compete in this very competitive medium of marketing? And the answer is, if you're thinking about the people you're trying to speak to as an audience, you're going to miss the mark every time. But if you think of the people you're trying to speak to as a community, then you're going to succeed. So you mentioned, I love that you used this word at the beginning of our conversation. You at the beginning, when you introduced me, you talked about creating, community building. If you are marketing to an audience, it's like taking shots in the dark. But if you market to a community and really figure out how to enable a group of people into a niche, you will truly find success in that. And you'll be able to sell your services much better that way. So figuring out, first of all, where your communities are. Second of all, if you need to build the community. And third of all, does the brand of your business properly project onto the podcast that you're creating, which then would properly project to the said community that you're creating? And if you're able to communicate that successfully, you'll create success, no doubt.
That's awesome. So you use community a lot there, right? So kind of, to me, that another way to say that is creating an authentic connection with someone as well, right? Kind of through that community. And is that really for you, you think, putting you on the spot here, is that what separates a podcast that's actually going to last and one that kind of fades out quickly? Is that community building is kind of that key element to a successful podcast?
Absolutely. I would say that, here's if for all the podcasters out there who want sage advice that has proved to be successful for me in my different experiences, different mediums, time and time again, it's to utilize social media and also the various tools that Spotify has been offering to see what people want to hear. If you're just recording content and putting it out there just because you can, okay, fine. If it's a hobby, then so be it. You'll find success because it's a hobby and there's not really any real metric you're trying to achieve. But for a business or even any kind of venture that has to do with the podcast, putting out little feelers out there to your community, like, hey, I'm going to be talking about said subjects this week. Who do you think are good guests to speak to? And you'll get different guests. Or even you'll say, hey, I want to approach something that just happened recently in US politics that has an impact on our industry. Do you think this is a good subject for us to talk about? Or is there a different subject you want to really hear about? If you create community guidelines and put feelers out there in that respect, you'll create it for a healthy community. You'll create a sense of belonging, which is one of the most, valuable things that you can offer a people. Because human beings, it's our nature to always want to belong to something greater than us. So as soon as they find out that, oh, hey, there's someone with a microphone who actually wants to listen to me and hear my insight on something and can actually bring on people that I can learn directly from, then you're going to definitely find a lot of success in that community building. Some of these great platforms for community building are like Discord, Substack nowadays. By the way, if you have a more old-fashioned crowd, you might just want to do like a newsletter with email campaigns. I also find that WhatsApp, a lot of people create group chats around WhatsApp for these purposes because WhatsApp is very useful, and a lot of people don't know how to utilize Substack or Discord yet. So WhatsApp is a great way to really do that. You just have to really make sure to facilitate proper community guidelines, so that way people don't get too spammy, people understand what the group chat's for, and it doesn't become a nuisance to people's lives.
That's awesome. So you said something there that I hadn't really thought about. It's kind of creating more tentacles, let's say, or more extensions from the podcast, right? So it's not just, hey, people are going to subscribe on Spotify or on Apple Podcasts or wherever, as I like to say, fine podcasts are served, right? But you actually want to move people, right, that are listening to another platform to connect there and create a community, which is a great idea, right? Because that's creating the longevity there. You started off kind of, talking about podcasting, and the goals and everything shouldn't be to get sponsors, right? To me, that's almost like someone saying, hey, I'm getting on social media to be an influencer, and I'm like, hey, good luck with that, right? The only way you're going to be an influencer and get sponsorships if you build that community, right? And so it seems like this is almost a parallel to that. So you want to build that community so that way you can grow the podcasting and be successful.
Absolutely. And I would also say that there's a mutual value that is shared between people that are in the community and also you as the podcaster. You as the podcaster might think to yourself, why do I need all these people in a group chat for me to be able to have a podcast? It seems like another step that is, not related. But consider this. As a marketer, you want to do market research. And so even if you create a show, or even if you haven't created a show, right, and you have this community established already based on people that believe in you, you can send them different samples of what you think is the best option. For example, different options for album art, or different options for theme songs, different options for descriptions. You just run everything by them. And if they're in belief of what you're creating here, and they recognize that what you're creating needs to be made and put out there, then they will give authentic answers, especially if you ask it in survey format. So a lot of these community building platforms that I described have different survey options. You can do different polls on different ideas, and you can even utilize just social media for that, for all your followers. Like, hey, which album art do you think is better, A, B, C, or D? And they'll tell you which is better. Now, these elements these specific examples are not what creates for a successful podcast, but this is all elemental and instrumental in making this possible.
Yeah, I mean, that authenticity, that community building, I think is so important, right? And that cross-platform potential you just came to or just shared is something that's fairly new to me, quite frankly, something that I had not really thought about. It's like, hey, even this one, people you're going to see cut up into reels on Instagram or TikTok, right? And I'm like, okay, that's great, but that's like an old school social media mentality where you just push it out, right? Like, okay, I got my job done. I'm pushing out the content versus trying to create a conversation. And that's really what it's all about, almost a little bit like a radio call-in show, right? Is you want people to actually be able to participate versus just consume it. But be active participants, I think, is a fantastic piece of advice.
And social media and putting out like micro content and whatnot, like when you make reels and you make like little short clips now, you definitely still want to be doing that. If you're only doing that right now, you're not firing off at all cylinders. You're not properly engaging your community the way that they should be engaged. However, if anything, there's inbound marketing versus outbound marketing. And in many ways, when you're putting organic content out there, like the shorts and the flyers and whatnot, that's the outbound marketing element. That's where you really want to start attracting people that you've never been a part of your community before. If you create successful collateral in that respect, putting it out there on social media, they will eventually join the community, which we see success in time and time again. But the key word here to make that possible is consistency. Because if you're not consistent, then everyone who's in that community over time might eventually find that this content's becoming, went from evergreen to stale. And they might end up just kind of backing out, especially if you're sending notifications weekly or bi-weekly just about, oh, we released another episode. Well, thanks for the value. You send out another episode. So now you have to find ways to regularly engage with the community that you already have, while simultaneously attracting people that have never been a part of your community before. And so it's a really wonderful balancing act, if you will, that constantly takes place in the lifespan of the podcast.
Yeah. No, it seems like I just want to pivot here a little bit to kind of the pitfalls of podcasting, right? Because you just have such a wealth of knowledge, Chaz. And so I'm just curious, and maybe, it's similar to the answer or kind of the talking points previously, but just to put you on the spot, if there's one thing that you wish every brand knew before launching their first podcast, what would that one thing be?
Yeah. I said it earlier and I'll say it again because so many people miss the mark time and time again. If you're creating a podcast for your business, understand that your podcast is not a hobby. And if you're treating it like a hobby, it will fail. People oftentimes make the mistake of thinking that a podcast is a hobbyist platform. And that's true to some degree, because you certainly can use it. Why this principle matters is because when you create a podcast that has nothing to do with your business, and it's just let's say I'm Chaz Volk and I want to create the Chaz Volk show, right? Okay, what is that about? Oh, it's just about things that I like. Really? It's not about your business? Like, what are you doing? So if you just want a hobby, then that's fine. But there are companies like mine that actually can create results and help you reach KPIs and OKRs. So you have to understand that your brand and the messaging around that really have a part to play. And your podcast is that on steroids. It's your brand and messaging on steroids to put that out there. So for example, I'll tell you a failure of mine, and I'll tell you a success of mine. Okay.
Awesome.
A failure of mine was actually the very first podcast I ever created, the Mr. Thrive podcast, right? That was a podcast that interviewed artists, entertainment professionals, because at the time that's what I was in. And then I was transitioning out of that. And then I got into the podcasting world. And they didn't fully understand when I created this podcast, the Mr. Thrive podcast, what it was for, because I was just getting started. I was a novice. And I can tell you that with that podcast, I created every single mistake in the book, and I'm proud of it because now I know what not to do. And I did the homework on failing. You have to fail in order to succeed eventually. So I have no regrets around that, because eventually I left that. And we had to leave behind the Mr. Thrive podcast because it no longer fit with our brand, which later on became the Authority Hive. Now, a great success of mine is I'm really proud of this one particular podcast that we did. Right now we're producing a show called The Strategic CFO. The Strategic CFO is about finance for financiers, and it's for the Silicon Valley branch of Financial Executives International, which is like a provisor, like a networking group for financial people.
Yeah.
And they have branches all over the world. As a matter of fact, they're a really great organization. We successfully transferred their brand and their messaging to our podcast. And we've been able to create results since, because now people that are in the world of finance that need to get in the mindset, that are interested in the thought leaders in that world, are on a regular basis being funneled into FEI's CRM. So we are able to do that by creating interesting content, valuable content from thought leaders, and then making sure that the call to actions are clear to the point where they're almost incentivized to become a listener that converts into an actual member of the organization.
I love that. Thank you for the examples there, right? So I think we've all had failures, and so it's so great to hear, refreshing to hear that a failure can also be a good thing because you learn so much from it, right? And so it sounds a little bit of the lesson there is, if you're interested in something, especially podcasting, just get out there and start doing it, right? Because just like anything else, you get better with more repetitions. The more you do it, the more often you do it, the better you're going to get. And podcasting is no exception there. It's about the consistency, putting out the good content, putting out good quality content, whether that's the video quality if people are happening to watch the video, or the audio quality. You don't want to turn off people there, some of those mistakes. But I want to talk about growth and growth strategies. You mentioned Provisors. For those listening that might not know, Chaz and I both are members of Provisors, which is a national networking group for trusted advisors in all different fields. It was actually started by attorneys in California, so it's very attorney heavy. So I'm curious, if I'm an attorney or law firm, Chaz, what does podcasting make sense for me? Is that something that you see law firms doing? Is that something that they can be successful with?
Out there, you kind of have a head start when it comes to Provisors. If an attorney was to create a podcast at this stage in the organization's existence, I have great news for you. The community already exists. All this talk about community building already exists. Every single, Provisors is a giant organization that's national, and it has multiple chapters all across the US. So as you go and put yourself out there, every single group is going to remember you, and you still have the ability to maintain a relationship, so to speak, with the people that become aware of your podcast, because they'll be listening to your episodes and they won't stop forgetting you. So oftentimes when you go to a Provisors meeting, you're waiting 3 hours to give a 30-second intro along with a testimonial.
Right.
Roughly 3 hours. I don't know if that's always the I forgot if that's
it can feel like that sometimes.
It can feel like 3 hours, right? So it's a long time to wait for a 30-second intro and then to have a little bit of handshaking and schmoozing, right? But if you have a podcast, well, then that's another touch right there. So most people spend those provisors all that time to make one touch. Yeah, maybe one touch could change your life with the right people that you meet. And might improve where your career is currently at. It might help you get there. But everyone's improvisers to make money. If you want to make money, you need to make more touches. And a great way to continue those touches along the way is through a podcast. So it's a way of networking without actually even being there. Even if, by the way, you release a very mundane episode, let's say, about something specific in the world of law. Well, someone's going to listen to it. And let's say a small number, like, okay, only 30 people listen to this episode. It must not be a good episode. It's not that it's not a good episode. It's not a very specific niche with a very specific expertise, which means that those 30 people are interested in those expertise, which means that those 30 people from provisors now have touched with you. So 30 people that you're not in a meeting with just experienced who you are and the essence of what your business is and will remember you. That's 30 more people than you didn't have before. That's actually huge. So again, people play the numbers game all the time. They're like, oh, it's only 30 people. Well, surely this isn't successful. This podcast isn't doing anything. Actually, it's doing a lot. 30 meetings that you didn't have to have. 30 meetings, 30 handshakes that you didn't need to do in order for people to know what your business is about. Right. 30 people that now remember your business that can now send you referrals just because you made one episode and you put it out there on the internet. Congratulations. You're now doing better than most other providers out there that they do in an hour.
That's awesome. That's such a great point, right? You have another kind of, touch point, a piece of content that you can put out there that people can get to know you and understand what you're about, kind of as an introduction there. And I want to kind of dive into that a little bit more, Chaz, kind of the business goals and how podcasting can go beyond content, actually support that. You mentioned, it can introduce you to people. It can help build up your network, right? You mentioned earlier, it can maybe even drive leads. I was wondering if you could kind of give some more specific advice or examples there, because that's something I think everybody's very interested in who has a podcast. How do I turn my content into a business goal machine that helps me achieve my business goals?
Sure. So I have to go back to the point about being consistent. And I would also say, relevancy to what is out there right now happening in the world is important. So, remember, your podcast is also about thought leadership. Eric, you're the SEO sommelier. And all that being said, like, people know your brand. So they remember Eric Ritter is the SEO sommelier. Okay. If you're consistent with that messaging and you have the effective call to actions that are direct too, like everyone right now who is listening should go to the show notes of this episode, find the link for Eric Ritter's amazing company he's put together and learn from him. Okay.
Yes, please.
Please do that. Right. That kind of call to action that is direct. I wasn't even bashful about it. I'm telling the listener right now, go do it. Go listen to like Eric Ritter's other episodes of the search bar. Go on his website. Go see what Eric Ritter's about. Go learn about his interest in wine tasting and golf, because I can tell you there's a lot of business value in learning about these things. When you're able to be direct about your call to actions, that's when we start seeing results happen. That's when we start to really properly see that, oh, okay, this host is not bashful about who he is. He's here for a reason. I have a part to play in this person's life. Now, relevancy is absolutely essential because, as I was saying before, there are so many things, there's so many current events that are happening that even if whether they're political or whether just general pop culture, it has a part to play in our lives. If you're able to relate what you're doing to the real world, then people will look at you as a thought leader. So between the call to actions and relevancy and consistency, you'll be able to drive those results. By consistency, I mean releasing episodes at least once every 2 weeks, bi-weekly.
Okay.
If you were able to do that while having, collateral go up on social media on a regular basis, while regularly engaging with that community that I mentioned for the inbound marketing, for the inbound leads that you have, you're going to do just fine.
Awesome. That's so insightful, Chaz, and really appreciate it, right? Because a lot of times, even in SEO, right, we put out content for content's sake. It's like, hey, we're experts on this. Let's just put out this content without even thinking, does this matter to the reader? What are they going to do once they read that piece of content? All these things. And same thing with the podcast. It's a piece of content that we want to do work for us, that we need to use to achieve our business goals. Otherwise, we're just going to have a chit chat back and forth, or we're just going to put out content for content's sake. And trust me, I've done that plenty of times. I come from the creative agency world, and yeah, we do creative for creative sake because we think it's great. But is it actually going to move the needle for our clients? Who knows? It looks cool, right? And that's, I think, is really important. So are there any case studies or any client success stories, Chaz, that you can maybe share with the audience here for people to learn from? Chaz, can you maybe share a client success story where podcasting really helped move the needle for that brand?
Absolutely. So we were working with a consultant who had her own independent agency. And this consultant had a podcast called The Cost of Not Paying Attention. And that podcast is still running strong today, thank God. And when we were working with her name is Janine Hammer-Holman. She's amazing. If you are listening to this, go check her out right now. The Cost of Not Paying Attention.
Show notes. Yep.
Yeah. The Cost of Not Paying Attention is on YouTube and on other listening platforms as well. And we took that podcast and we essentially provided the consulting for the strategy. Then we eventually took on the full production of it for some time. When we were doing that, her need for speaking engagements was absolutely up there in the priority list. And we had that call to action on a regular basis. But there was much more to the needs of this podcast than just that. We rebranded the whole thing. We made sure that we got to a reasonable point where, okay, she had the collateral to promote regularly. And she also had the SEO optimized description. So that way the content was more findable. We made sure that people were touched in the right communities and made sure that it was a regular part of other speaking engagements as well. So, by the way, one other thing I'm just going to, a little side tip as I continue the story, is that if you could ever marry two promotional ideas together, it'd be to marry podcasting with public speaking engagements. At a public speaking event, you should have your QR code for your podcast there. And at every podcast episode that comes out, you should have a mention of every single speaking engagement that you're going to do, or have a book me link. Like a hear me in person link, like book me today kind of link, a call to action somewhere in there. Those two forms of putting your word out there and thought leadership marry each other so seamlessly. If you're a speaker, you're already ahead of the game. Okay, so I
love it.
So we made sure to emphasize to do what she had been doing previously, and to really make sure there was a proper strategy behind it, to really just bolster a lot of the different ideas and the theories that I've put out there onto her show. She ended up becoming one of the first speakers to ever speak about diversity, equity, inclusion for the U.S. Navy because of the efforts that we put in. The U.S. Navy booked her, which is insane. So it's just one of those things.
Huge,
yeah.
Very cool. Well, thanks for sharing that, Chaz, and all the diamonds here that you're just dropping, right, left and right. Which brings us to one of my favorite segments here at what we end the podcast on, which is the checklist, right? So I always want to make sure that the audience, the listeners, has a takeaway. And so if you guys have not been paying attention, maybe you're at the gym working out, you're driving your car, now's the time to perk up, because Chaz and I put a checklist together, the podcast marketing checklist, to make sure your content doesn't collect dust. So here are 5 critical steps to launch or even scale your podcast with purpose. So it sums everything up we talked about and gives some additional advice. So I'll just kind of get started here, and then feel free to jump in, Chaz, on the 5 different critical steps here. So number 1 is clarify your mission, right? So really understand, know who you're talking to and what kind of information or what you're promising people that are going to listen. And then number 2 is master the audio, right? no one's sticking around for echoey mic quality. A little gear goes a long way, right? So that's something I learned the hard way, quite frankly. So I was just using my MacBook microphone or my AirPod Pros, and I heard the AirPod Pros are actually worse than the MacBook microphone, and so it was just sounding robotic and kind of just not broadcast quality, right? So you can go to your local retailer or Amazon or wherever you shop and just pick up a good mic there, and I think is that first step there, along with the recording platform. We use StreamYard here. There's other platforms out there. I don't know, Chaz, do you have any other tips for people as far as the mastering the audio goes?
I would say that nowadays, when it comes to virtual meetings, which is a majority of meetings today, having a microphone is the equivalent of buying a tie for that business meeting, which I know sounds kind of very silly, but I can't tell you how many times I've been on a Zoom call where someone has invested in their camera quality, in their microphone quality. They get decent cameras, not even the most expensive cameras, but you can tell has really changed the visual. And when you have that and you enter a meeting, people look at you like, oh, this guy really actually like invests in himself. Like this guy has something important to say, and because of that, he has to really be ready for this call. Like he didn't just come here, whatever, right? Because no one's really dressing up in 3-piece suits for Zoom calls. They were at the beginning of the pandemic because they didn't really know how to like handle it. And then after the pandemic ended, and now that we're here, it's kind of like, oh, well, we're still on Zoom calls, but we're still acting like our Zoom calls are not that important when they can change our lives if we have the right medium. So having good audio quality and even good camera quality these days is the equivalent of dressing formal to meetings these days.
I love it. That's a great analogy, great visual there, Chaz. I couldn't agree more. It makes such a big difference, especially like you said, if we're doing podcasting not as a hobby, but as for a business purpose, right? It's important to take it serious like that, what includes making investments. It's like you go to a business meeting and get a nice new tie, get that microphone, get that camera setup done. Love that. Yeah. But moving on here with the list, number 3 is launch with intention. And this isn't just when you launch, but it's also for your podcast as it's running, right? So treat your launch kind of as a mini series premiere, right? Kind of launching it, shouting it from the rooftops. You want to hype it up on social, any email database or list that you have, and rally your community, right? So that's something kind of coming full circle there, Chaz, kind of talking about community and how important that is. And I think it's not just when you're launching, but also as you're going on, is continue to involve your community, which I appreciate you really pointing out how important that is.
You want your community to feel like they are a part of something important. They might have the ability to change the world. Eric, I completely agree with you. And you have to remember that podcasts have the ability to change the world. You want your audience to feel like they're going to be a part of that movement potentially. So an example of this is that a podcast like Serial freed someone who was actually in jail who was on death row. And we see this time and time again happen. People's lives have changed because they were on the Joe Rogan Experience. Your podcast, while I told you not to pursue sponsorship, you should certainly market yourself like you have the potential to get sponsorship. By doing that, you will surely potentially change someone's life. A big podcast that I've been working on, this one is a passion project, by the way. I need to put that out there as a disclosure. This is a passion project, and that's called Bad Jew. It's the place where there's no such thing as a bad Jew. I can't tell you how many Jewish listeners that I had never met before in my life got involved in my podcast and then started pursuing their Jewish journeys, or my podcast somehow had a part to play in their Jewish journeys because of the show. And that's like, when they tell me that, I'm like absolutely humbled by that, because like, wow, I just had a dream. I just had a passion. I wanted to learn about Torah, and I did it in a really unique way. And that somehow changed your life. What a blessing, honestly. Yeah. So you have the ability to change the world with your podcast. Act like it and promote like it and work your podcast like it.
I love that, and definitely have to check out Bad Jew. Recommend it to everyone. We'll put that in the show notes as well. And it's great how you could share your passion with others, right, through mediums such as podcasting and make a difference in other people's lives. I think that's a great example there, is so important. And so number 4, we're going through the checklist here. 4 of 5 is staying consistent, right? Throwback to earlier, I think Chaz said at least every other week. The main thing is that you pick a schedule and you stick with it, right? It's so important because the algorithm and your audience will thank you, right? So I listen to a podcast. It's a German podcast called Fest and Flauschig, which, just outing myself there a little bit. They come out every Sunday, and it's my Sunday listen. It comes out Sunday morning, every Sunday. I know, hey, I'm going to listen to this new podcast, and it comes out consistently, right? And that's something I reward them with, is that I listen to it every week. And so will your audience, if they know, hey, every Monday morning, they're going to drop this one. Even if you're, you could be a news like the Morning Brew. I enjoy the Morning Brew. I know every morning the Morning Brew is going to be in my playlist. I can listen to it. So whatever that schedule is that you come up with, just stick with it, because that's how you build habits in people, right? Is it just becomes a habit that they know, hey, every Monday, every Tuesday, every morning, every Sunday, whenever it is, that podcast is dropping, because we're creatures of habits, right? As humans here. So I think that's important there. So Chaz, I know you had talked about that earlier. I think, twice a week sounds great, but really, I think it is, it's a schedule that you can stick to and that you are going to be able to be consistent with. All right, so we'll go to number 5. The last point here in the checklist is repurpose like a pro. So we talked about that a little bit earlier, is turning every episode into clips, carousels, quotes, blogs, and more. One episode, infinite content. And so just real quick here, personal note is the reason I started podcasting again after a long time is I needed to create content for myself. And what easier way to do that than to podcast, because I don't need to write anything. I don't have to think about it. I just show up and I have an awesome guest like Chaz who helps fill up this podcast. And then we can turn that into all kinds of stuff. I can turn this into a blog post, several blog posts. I can publish this on my social media. I can put it on my email newsletter, all kinds of different places. So it's one piece of content that has infinite possibilities. So that was number 5, Chaz. And you mentioned even beyond that is creating that community and repurposing content there and having that two-way conversation.
By the way, before we acknowledge what you just said, I have to just say one more thing about tip number 5 here.
Yeah.
With the accessibility of today, it's both a blessing and a curse that how accessible certain mediums are. But certainly take advantage of this, that writing a book is difficult. But once you do have it completed, and if it actually does have value, it's pretty successful and certainly can build up a reputation. So that being said, think about if you could take the conversations that you've had from your podcast, you could transcribe all that dialogue, hours and hours and hours of dialogue. If you just take a year of even doing one episode a month, and it would fit in the theme of a book that you want to put out there, guess what? You can, in the advent of today's software, in the advent of publishing books so successful nowadays, you certainly could make a book out of all the conversations that you've had. Eric, if you wanted to create the absolute most epic book on marketing and SEO and all things digital, you could take this conversation with the tens of other conversations that you've had on your podcast and turn it into a book and then sell it. And then you get the SEO sommelier book. The first ever.
My mind is blown, literally. For those listening, yes. Chaz is doing the mind blown kind of hand gesture here, and I couldn't agree more. So coming soon to a bookstore near you, the SEO Sommelier book, based on a true story, it's based on a true podcast or something like that.
yeah, I like that.
That's
okay, and
that's awesome.
The final thing is that the two-way conversation, like you said. Absolutely essential. I would say that you want to listen. When you do a show long enough, you learn the right tone for not just bringing value and getting the story out of the guest that's on the show, like Eric has done so well, but you also learn how to, in a way, get the audience involved in the show in a very subtle way. And it could be the less subtle examples are things like mentioning the call to action, but the more subtle ways involve having the guest explain certain concepts that might seem like insider knowledge to us who are on the show, but to actually have them expand on it. When people do that, like Eric did so well on this podcast, you essentially allow the listener who might not have anything to do with this industry, who is interested in this industry, to become an expert over time, which brings value to the host of the show, which brings that value to you, but it also allows them to feel like they're involved and they're included. Because if you just talk over them and you don't give them a chance to comprehend what you're saying, then they're not part of the conversation. Kind of like, imagine if you were in a conversation, there's three of you in a space, you're all having a conversation, but someone's very clearly getting ignored. The other two guys are just talking about things that are inside between the two of them. One of them is going to feel left out. So you don't want to leave out your buddy, which is essentially what you got to think about in the podcast. Your listener is your buddy, and you want them to learn and to gain value from being in the presence of this great conversation. So that's a really essential piece there.
I love it, Chaz. Thank you so much. I do have one final bonus question I just thought of. It's the deserted island game, right? If you were on a deserted island, you could only take one movie, one book, etc. So Chaz, if you were on a deserted island, what is the one podcast you would take with you that you could only listen to that one podcast on this island? What would that podcast be?
Man, it's tough. It's gotta be a podcast, a lot of episodes. And like, as stereotypical as this sounds, I would go with the Joe Rogan podcast because it's Joe Rogan's podcast. For those who don't know, we've been talking about podcasting as a venture, even though he gets millions of dollars at this point for all that he puts out there. And it's basically a venture for him. It is a venture for him. It's produced like a hobby. And you get the most serious of serious people. You get the least serious of the serious people. You get nut jobs. You get experts. You get all kinds of people. So it's a very eclectic bunch of people that get onto that show. At this point, I would want, if I'm on an island, for the simple sake of needing variety, I would go for the Joe Rogan podcast for sure. Because there's plenty of variety in that show. And also every episode's 3 hours long, and I would be on that island for some time. So
right.
It's a pretty good answer to me. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's a great choice, Chaz. For me, it'd be a similar thought process, right? Something that has a lot of episodes, something, that has a lot of variety. And for me, it would just be Conan O'Brien Needs a Friend, because I grew up listening to Conan O'Brien, watching him on TV. Big shout out. His sense of humor is just like right up my alley. And his episodes are phenomenal, right? So yeah, thank you, Chaz. So kind of as you were talking about kind of being a good host, no one does it better than Conan, right? There's a reason that like his late night show was so successful. Because he knows how to have a great conversation with someone. The only downside to picking his podcast, Conan O'Brien Needs a Friend, is it has all these pop culture references and people are promoting their stuff, right? Their movies and TV shows, etc. So if I'm listening to it, then I probably want to watch those shows or consume them, which I wouldn't be able to, but I would still enjoy the conversation. So that would be my answer.
You probably get the same issue with Joe Rogan's podcast as well, where people go on there to promote themselves all the time. But you're right. There's a lot of great variety there, a lot of interesting people. And Conan O'Brien is a fantastic host, just so charming, puts himself out there so well. Yeah. I could rage on forever and ever, Conan O'Brien, for sure.
Awesome.
Another great show as well that's pretty ridiculous is Smartless, for those who want a good, stupid, funny show. That's a good time.
Awesome. What was that again, Chaz? What's it called?
It's called Smartless.
Smartless. Okay. I have not checked that one out yet, so that's going to go right to the top of my queue.
If you want something dumb, just like the title implies, it's a pretty funny but dumb show. It's a good time.
Good. Hey, sometimes you need something with no nutritional value just to kind of shut down and just kind of turn off the brain for a little bit. So I can definitely appreciate that.
Content. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Every once in a while you need that. Awesome. Well, hey, thank you so much for being on, Chaz. Thank you to our listeners. We want to make sure here as we wrap up, we don't want your voice to go unheard. Podcast isn't just content. We hope we taught you a thing or two about that, because it's your brand story, values, and vision in one powerful format. So make sure you download our podcast marketing guide and start making your message matter, whether you're just getting started or you have an established podcast. Again, big thanks, big shout out to Chaz Volk for dropping gems today and showing us how strategy turns episodes actually into full ecosystems. So check out Mr. Thrive Media to learn more. And you said you have a new company now, Chaz, is that right? Or it's Mr.
So
Thrive
Mr. Thrive Media.
Still?
It's the Authority Hive. If you type in MrThrive.com, it'll automatically transfer over to the Authority Hive. The Authority Hive is the marketing agency that specializes in podcasting. We have a hive of ways to boost your authority and put branding out there through content marketing, organic marketing, and so much more.
Awesome. And I definitely can't recommend Chaz enough. So make sure you're checking out his website, checking out him, following him in there. And if this episode lit a spark, share it with a friend, leave a review, and you might hear your name in the next episode, because I read out all reviews that someone leaves, no matter what you guys write or where it's from. Thank you so much for joining us here at the Search Bar. Now go hit record and start building your brand one episode at a time. Before I let you go, I want to give you my recommendation for wine, like I do at the end of every episode. Today, I'm pouring a bold yet balanced wine, which is a Côtes du Rhône red blend. And just like that wine delivers deep and depth without overwhelm, a great podcast brings strong ideas and smooth delivery together. You're building trust one sip or one episode at a time. So grab a glass, fire up the mic, and join me as we make digital marketing as approachable and flavorful as this delicious wine. Chaz, thank you so much. I can't thank you enough for taking some time out of your day to chat with us, to educate my audience here. You were fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you for that great suggestion of wine. I got to go get myself some right now.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Chaz. Thanks. Cheers, everyone.